What's up everybody, Rob here, and welcome to the Newb DM. Today we're going to be going over the mythology of the Naga and the Roc. No, not that rock. Not that rock either. Come on. There we go. The Roc. So just as a heads up, the story between the Naga and the Roc and their mythology is a little bit complicated, and by that I mean, not only do their stories get a little bit crazy, but depending on which part of the world you're in, their stories can be vastly different. So I'll try to point out, at least to the best of my ability, instances where there are different ideas on the creatures, but just wanted to give you a heads up. Anyway, the reason I'm doing the Roc and the Naga at the same time is because these two creatures have intertwined origin stories. So we begin our story with two sisters named Vinata and Kadru, and both of these sisters married the same man named Kasyapa. In fact, I believe he had like 14 wives, but we're not going to worry about the other 12. Anyway, Vinata and Kadru both started asking Kasyapa for sons. Now, Vinata wanted only 2 sons, but she wanted them to be very powerful. Kadru, on the other hand, wanted 1,000 snake children. Kadru was able to grant both of their wishes, and a little bit later, they both laid eggs. Yep, they laid eggs. Now, Vinata's first son doesn't really affect us mythologically, but what we're going to look at is her second son, named Garuda. Now, when Garuda was hatched from his egg, he turned out to be a giant, incredibly powerful bird. Upon his birth, he found out that while he was still inside of his egg, his mother had lost a bet to his aunt, Kadru, and was now enslaved to her. Garuda wasn't too happy about this, so he approached Kadru and she agreed to release Vinata if Garuda can bring her the elixir of immortality. Now this elixir was held by the gods, but Garuda agreed anyway, and after flying to the heavens, he ended up, after a few battles and a few diplomatic situations, acquiring this elixir. Now, for him to get the elixir, he had to make a deal with the gods though, and this deal was they would allow him to take the elixir to free his mother if, in exchange, he helps them steal the elixir back. Now, before Kadru and her snake children could drink the elixir, Garuda convinced them that they need to go pray to the gods and thank them for what they're about to drink. They agreed, and while they were out giving thanks, the gods flew down and stole away this elixir of immortality. As a fun fact, when they stole the elixir, a few droplets apparently fell on the grass, and when Kadru and her snake children returned to find the elixir missing, the snakes slithered over and began licking the elixir off of the grass. The grass cut their tongues in half, and this is the origin story as to why snakes have forked tongues. Now this origin story is pretty important for a couple of reasons. For one, it introduces us to Garuda, who is thought to be the original ancestor to the mythology of the Roc. Second, it introduces us to the Naga, who are the snake children of Kadru. And third, it lets us know that there's now a rivalry between Garuda and the Naga. So now that we know this origin story, let's begin talking about the creatures individually, and we'll start out with the Roc. Now, unfortunately, there are no instances in the Roc story that involves either smelling things or things cooking. The reason Garuda is considered to be the origin of the mythology of the Roc is because of a particular story. Now, in this story, Garuda is flying through the air, and he happens to look down and see an elephant fighting a crocodile. So he flies down from the sky and grabs the elephant and flies away with it. The notion of the Roc being able to capture and fly away with elephants is a common trend through all of the different lores of the Roc. Though the story of the Roc began in India, it actually ended up spreading west through the Middle East and even as far as the eastern coast of Africa. In fact, there's actually stories of not only did Marco Polo write about the Roc, but it's said that him and Genghis Khan even traveled to Madagascar in search of the Roc. There's also the appearance of the Roc in the 1001 Arabian Nights stories involving Sinbad. So the Roc is a giant mystical bird that's similar in appearance to an eagle, but it's said to have had a wingspan of 48 feet and was able to fly down and grab and carry away the largest of land animals. What I found most interesting was the ideas of where the myth of the Roc came from, and from everything I've looked into, it looks like there's a combination of 3 different ideas. First of all, they think that people saw these massive eagles that were big enough to fly down and snatch and grab and fly away with like small lambs or stuff like that. Now, while the baby lambs weren't large per se, they were bigger than what most people were accustomed to when they saw birds of prey. They were used to them grabbing rats and rabbits and other small game. They weren't used to seeing them grab things as large as a lamb, so they saw this and started associating it with this bird being really strong, and as the story spread, it began to get exaggerated and people began to make this bird seem larger than life. So it went from being able to pick up a lamb or a small sheep to being able to pick up an elephant. Another idea is that people found massive eggs that belonged to flightless birds such as the ostrich. They would see these eggs and they would think, this is a massive egg, it must belong to a massive bird, and speculation started to happen that somewhere out there there's a gigantic bird that lays gigantic eggs. Lastly, we come back to the ostrich. People saw the ostrich and other flightless birds, thought that those were chicks, and that there must be a much larger parent out there somewhere. So now that we know the mythological stories of the Roc, let's see how it compares to the lore of the Roc in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, the Roc made its first appearance in D&D in 1974 in the white box of the first edition. Since then, it's been in every edition that's been released. So when we compare the 2 different lores, we see that there are a few differences. The first big difference is in the actual size of the Roc. Now, in the mythology of the Roc, it's known as having a wingspan of being 48 feet wide. In D&D, the wingspan is labeled as being over 200 feet. That's a sizable difference. The next big difference we see is in the actual creation of the Roc. Now, as we learned earlier, Garuda, which is considered the first Roc, was the child of Vinata and Kasyapa. In D&D, the Roc was created by the gods of the giants. What I did find interesting was that in D&D lore, the gods of the giants created the Roc as mounts for the giants so that they could fight the dragons of the air. In the Garuda story, he eventually becomes the mount for one of the principal deities named Lord Vishnu. Besides those few differences, the 2 lores are fairly similar. Both of them involve a large bird of prey that's capable of carrying away large land animals, and I feel Wizards of the Coast did a pretty good job with sticking to the mythology. With that being said, let's go on ahead and switch over to the rival of the Roc, the Naga. Now, the Naga are half human, half snakes that can take either the whole form of a snake or the whole form of a human, and they're typically found in the Hindu and Buddhist countries of Asia. Now, they are known as being strong, handsome, and wise creatures that come from an underground realm called Patala. Now, it seems that they play so much of a role in the Hindu and Buddhist countries that there are actually some dynasties in India that claim to be descendants of the Naga. So this was the point where I reached the very pinnacle of confusion and complications. So depending on which part of these Hindu and Buddhist countries you're in, there are entirely different stories and ideas on the Naga. There are, as I said earlier, some areas that believe that the Naga are wise and handsome. There are others that believe the Naga are cowards and full of injustice, and there are even some areas that see them as evil and vicious creatures that like to kidnap humans to their underground realm and torture them. So there are a few points that I've noticed that seem to vary depending on which country you're in, but some of the more noticeable ones are, for instance, some countries believe that the Naga are immortal, while others do not. So that being said, when I compare it to D&D, it's really going to compare to which belief system you're looking at. Anyway, the Naga made its first appearance in D&D in August of 1975 in a TSR Games newsletter called the Strategic Review Number 3. If we start out with the differences, the first thing I notice is the appearance of the Naga. As I said earlier, in mythology, the Nagas were half human, half snakes that could take on the full appearance of either side. In D&D, it seems they just take on the full appearance of the snake. Another difference is actually specifically stated in the 5th edition Monster Manual, saying that the rivals to the Naga are the Yuan-Ti. Now, if we remember from earlier, we found out that the rivals for Naga are the Roc, more specifically, Garuda. This actually leads to another nitpicky difference that I noticed, and what it was is that it seems the Yuan-Ti are more or less another form of the Naga in their mythology. The Yuan-Ti are half humans, half snakes. That being said, they don't have any mythological connection to the Naga. In fact, Yuan-Ti are a D&D original monster. It's not something that has any mythology outside of Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games. Now, going over some similarities between the mythological Naga and the D&D Naga, the first thing I noticed was that there are a few countries that do believe the Naga are immortal. And if we look in the D&D lore, Nagas, if they're killed, rejuvenate after a few days. The last thing I want to point out, and I found it really interesting, though I'm not sure if this was just a lucky coincidence or if this was actually drawn from the mythology, but as I stated earlier, depending on where you are throughout Asia, the Naga can be thought of as having multiple different kinds of personalities, ranging from good to evil, kind to mean, and so on. In D&D, they are actually thought of having multiple different personalities as well. In fact, if I quote the 5th edition Monster Manual, it says they are either benevolent dictators or brutal tyrants. And that's about it for the Naga. Between the D&D lore and the mythology, there are a few small differences, but for the most part, they're fairly similar. So to conclude this video, I want to leave you with a fun little fact. The female name for a Naga is a Nagi, or a Nagini. For those Harry Potter fans out there, you'll recognize that name as being the name of Lord Voldemort's snake. Hopefully I've left some knowledge in your noggin about the Naga and the Roc. Let me know down in the comments what you think about the two creatures. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at @TheNewbDM, and as always, have fun.